Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas. Jacoby here from Kyiv, Ukraine, with Fireside Chat, another annual ministry update. So, in the past, going back a couple of years ago now, I used to do monthly ministry updates, um, but it was, well, there's a number of reasons why I stopped doing it. I put a lot of work into them, gathering pictures and making videos and writing, trying to write something thoughtful or creative, and the views were very low. And every month I just get one or two unsubscribes. And then I'd get a couple new subscribes every year. So it just seemed like a low, didn't make sense to work so hard at something that had such little support. And so I switched to doing annual updates and just trying to catch people up on the ministry annually, and then post on Facebook and Instagram regular things that we do in ministry and stuff. So anyway, I meant to get this Christmas update out by Christmas, but we had a very busy few days with Christmas, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. And I like to keep these updates as short and sweet as possible, but I have a good kind of number of things to talk about, including my arm, what happened there. And I'll do my best probably tomorrow or this evening to add some pictures or video clips to this video in post, but I just can't guarantee I'll get to it. Everything takes me 3 times longer to do, and I really just want to get this video out to you guys. So also I'll be talking about some original plans I had for this update, and while those are going to be things that come later, and you can keep your eye out for those. The camp that we did for the kids back in August, a trip Lid and I had to Rome, a 13-year anniversary wedding trip. We wanted to go somewhere in Europe for our 10-year wedding anniversary, but every year something prevented that, whether it be COVID or a full-scale invasion of Russia. So we finally just went. Talk about that more later. Our recent Christmas celebrations, the fact that we moved to Kyiv, why we moved to Kyiv, and how that's going. Um, some more about, a little bit about soul searching and what I believe God might be wanting me to do in the future. Preaching I've been doing at a couple churches here in Kyiv, and a new Bible study in English that we're going to be starting. Some unfinished projects, and a little bit about my dream to be a writer. So, without further ado, you might be wondering how I did this. So, 10 days ago, I think it was, we live in a flat that's like in central Kyiv, a very amazing location. Everything we need of us is within walking distance, and there's beautiful architecture all around. It's one of the safest areas in Ukraine, even though it's one of the most targeted areas. I don't know how correct that is, because I know Kharkiv and Dnipro are highly targeted also, and of course the front, but it's Kyiv. So there's air raid sirens, I don't know, commonly 3 times a day, most often at night, and we live close to the metro where we could go underground, but we have 2 dogs, and to go down every time there's an air raid siren, would just get extremely distracting and tedious. So what we do is we have a bug out bag prepared, and we have a section of our flat we think is the safest. We're kind of away. Our flat is in the side of the building not facing the street, so it's facing the yard, so the chances of debris falling on us are low. We're on the 2nd floor. But anyways, I digress. Our flat is like, this building's 120 years old. So we live in an area where people might think, oh, you're have money or something. But this flat has like been neglected. It's like owned by some violinist who lives in New York, kind of an artsy type. And so the whole flat is kind of artsy, very high ceilings. But it seems like no one's lived here a long time. And if they did, they didn't take care of it. I mean, the bathroom is in bad condition. There's like a jacuzzi tub in there, but it's very old and barely works. So if I want to get it working, it needs to be looked at or taken apart. So we use it for storage and for hang drying clothes. Um, so anyway, especially here in my office, there's big tall windows. And earlier last year, I went through and I put rubber stripping on all the windows to keep some of the cold air out. But I didn't do this one. So this year, it was just so cold in here. And then our vents, our radiators, are like in the wall. Usually in Ukraine, they're like in the flat, they're in the open. But in this flat, they're like in the wall with little vents, and they don't emit a lot of heat. And then we have these really long curtains that were all covering those vents. So what I decided to do was cover 3 windows in the house and leave 3 open for sunlight. This one I put on the rubber seal, and then I covered it with some of this like cheap foam insulation stuff. And then over that I put emergency blanket, which I had them sitting here somewhere, but I don't know where I put them. They're not foil, but they look and feel like foil. It's another material, but it's basically to protect you from hypothermia if you're like lost in the wilderness, or potentially could save you from a forest fire, I guess. Oh, here they are. They're right here. So I had a bunch of these that we bought in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We were going to do like a refugee kind of communal camp in the mountains. But then by the time I got back from the States with all this humanitarian aid and camping equipment to do that, I was going to buy some shipping containers and turn them into bunk rooms and yada yada. I had this whole plan in mind. But then we discovered most of the refugees that had fled eastern Ukraine had moved on to other countries. So for a few weeks, western Ukraine was really packed out with refugees, and Moldova and other countries. But in time, they all just began moving further west. So then there wasn't really a need for such a thing anymore. So we decided to take all this new camping equipment we had and do kids camps in the mountains, which we did for a couple years. So I had done 2 windows, and I was working on the 3rd one, standing on a step ladder in the window sill on the top. And I actually have a lot of experience on ladders. I roofed for a period of my life, about a year or so, and I've never fallen down. But anyway, I was home alone, and I tried to scooch the ladder forward because I couldn't quite reach a spot with the duct tape. And the corner went down. I fell back, grabbed the curtains, and I realized I'm going to rip the curtains down and fall on my back. So I let go of the curtains, turned with my arm, and the immediate impact did with my arm, but I didn't want to keep a stiff arm. In my past, I was a wrestler for many years, and I know you don't want to fall with a stiff arm, so I kind of rolled into it on my shoulder. So anyway, my shoulder is still sore. A lot of spots in my hand feel sprung or damaged, and then I cracked the bone. Doctor calls it a break. It wasn't dislocated though. It seemed like maybe a fracture in the X-ray. I couldn't tell, but right near where it curves out to meet your elbow. And that's not good for me because I already have tennis elbow issues, which are literally taking years to heal, if they will ever heal. I'm supposed to massage them every day and exercise them every day to strengthen the muscles around it. Now this process might take even longer. And this all happened when I was very stressed because I needed to get this update done. And I also, with Russia, like ever since Ukraine did long-range attacks in Russia, Putin started a couple times sending this Oreshnik missile, this hypersonic with potentially nuclear capabilities. And a lot of us think that he's not going to do a nuke, but I don't want to assume that. I mean, we've chosen to stay here in Ukraine, and we know that it's possible we could die, or, I mean, what I really fear, to be honest, is not dying, but me and my dogs or my wife being severely injured. So I just do whatever I can to be preventative, to have, I have full hazmat suits with CBRN gear for Lera and I. I told her I want us to practice donning them. When I worked on the fishing boats in Alaska, we would regularly put on these survival suits, and one of us would jump into the Bering Sea, and the boat would come around, and we'd do these drills of getting the man out of the water. So I wanted Leah and I to practice putting them on so we could do it in under a minute and help each other zip up and tape up. Because you have this cam tape, you're supposed to tape the seals and then, the mass filters and all this. So, but I would have a hard time doing that now with the broken arm. So that's one thing I have. And then when we left Western Ukraine, we had to get a garage there to move to Kyiv. We didn't know if our move to Kyiv would be temporary or permanent. We didn't want to bring everything here. And we like having a garage in Western Ukraine so that, like, if we had to evacuate here in a hurry, we wouldn't lose everything. So we have furniture, a lot of camping equipment, and I have other things like large 19-liter water jugs, emergency food buckets, tools, etc., etc. So I asked my friend in Western Ukraine to send me some of these water bottles, some of this e-food, and then I made my own makeshift Faraday cage for a Honda generator I have and a few other items like rechargeable batteries and lights. So now we have backup water, backup food, and a makeshift Faraday cage that I do not know will work. It's just a cardboard box sitting in foam and with 3 layers of aluminum foil wrapped around it. And I use spray glue to do this with one arm. I want to get a real Faraday cage from searching for like top rated Faraday cages, and this brand always had #1 spot on a few different websites. It's called Mission Darkness, and they have one Faraday kit where you just place it in a 27-gallon tote and then close the top. So in my condition where I can't DIY build my own Faraday cage, this is what I'm going to go with for now. Also, I have a ammo can right here. A friend of mine who was taking aid to the front brought me this as a gift. And if you remove the rubber gasket inside and scrape it with a wire brush so that metal meets metal, and then probably tape some copper there or foil that's crunched up so that you have clean metal on metal contact with no leakage. You can use this as a Faraday box also. So anyways, me thinking about the holidays coming, and Putin likes to do things on holidays, and he's been escalating attacks. We had just like 1 or 2 kilometers from our house, all the windows blown out of this beautiful cathedral just a few days ago. And if there was some kind of EMP attack or a nuke attack that shut down electronics or potentially a solar flare. I was listening to an interview with Amaryllis Fox.
So this is a tweet from me. I don't normally read people's tweets, but in standing with Ukraine, the Biden-Harris administration convinced them, Ukraine, to abandon a peace deal that would have ceded only half of the territory that Russia now occupies. And for that opportunity to lose twice as much of their homeland, they paid with tens of thousands of innocent lives. We did this to control the 11 trillion of minerals under the Donbass. We did it to grind down the Russian war machine on the grist of Ukrainian teenagers. We did it to hand out hundreds of billions of dollars to U.S. hedge funds who are, as we speak, carving up rights to Ukraine's fertile soil and vast mineral resources. The truth is the United States has never stood with the people of Ukraine. That is simply a jingle, an ad campaign broadcast to those who have never been there, designed to sell taxpayers on the appeal of prolonging war for profit. We have cost Ukraine her territory. We have cost Ukraine her children. The war hawks and the bankers are no friends to Ukraine. Whoa!
Who's a former CIA agent who was running RFK Jr.'s political campaign, and she said that I think it's 80-something years, if I remember correctly, there's a certain percentage chance of a solar storm, which could create an EMP event and shut down a lot of electronics in the world. So if we had at least a backup generator, at minimum, I'd like to back up some other things like our power bank and stuff. But so I was stressed about trying to get all this done because soon I'm supposed to be starting an English Bible study, but I like to get stuff out of the way so that I can get back to a normal routine, daily routine of prayer life and exercise and preparing for spiritual messages, etc., whatever else I need to be doing. So, yeah, and then God had this happen, and I'm like, well, now how am I going to do anything? I was pretty I was more upset about losing the time and the freedom to do this stuff than I was about breaking my arm. And but we have to always ask, what's God showing me here? And that's that sometimes the priority and the value and the things that we stress about are not as important as we might think they are. And so to slow down and just trust that we'll get done what we need to get done in time. It's a little bit tougher later because with her working every day, she works, if you haven't kept up, she works with a large humanitarian organization that does a lot for Ukraine. And so I've been doing most of the bulk of the cleaning. She tries to help with that as she can, and the cooking. And usually I'll prepare myself a pot of something. Or for a while I was on an intermittent fasting diet where I'd have my chicken already cooked and my rice and beans, and I would just heat it up and add a few like arugula and feta and avocado to add some flavor and some nutrition, and just mix it all in a bowl and eat it. And I was eating that every day for several weeks when I was on a diet, and I was losing weight. But as we had events with friends and holidays, I got off the diet, and now I'm trying to get back to it. Anyway, so when I'm off the diet, I try to make a big pot of Mexican food or chili or borscht or spaghetti and just eat that all week, and saves a lot of time because time is very valuable to me. And yeah, so I'm taking care of the dogs, and so when I broke my arm, Lyra had to really baby me for the first couple of days, and I still have to ask her help with a few things, or things that I can do, but it takes a long time. Have you ever tried to put socks on with one hand? I mean, it's possible, but it's a little tricky. So I challenge you with that. I actually was thinking sometimes I make up games for the kids camps we do, and I was like, that would be interesting to have a series of challenges where they have to do it with one arm, or handicapped in some other way, blindfolded or whatnot. So it's interesting how much you take that one arm for granted and realize how hard it is to do things with just one hand. So originally for this update, I had a series of posts I wanted to write on Facebook about various topics. And then I wanted to link to them all in this post because I like our supporters to be able to know what I'm thinking about the world, what I'm thinking about theology. I try to be as much as possible a glass house, so people know who and what it is that they're supporting. And sometimes this can cost me because people can agree with you 9 out of 10 times, but if you say one thing they really don't like if you support Ukraine, they're done with you. If you if you say something critical of Ukraine, they are done with you. It's like, come on, you can't win, and you lose a lot of supporters. But I mean, not a lot. Like, a lot have been faithful, but a certain percentage. Our support could be at least $1,000 to $2,000 a month more financially if I wasn't so open about everything I believe. But I just think that that keeps my conscience clean before God. And I don't believe that anyone should have any job where they're not free to speak what they believe, especially if it's Christian, where they would lose that job. And if they would, they should speak anyway. And God will give them another job. Or they can start a business, or they will find a way. But I don't think we as Christians should ever let the fact we need a job shut us up. So that's my view on that. I think it's the correct Christian view, but I mean, I understand why some people are more careful with that. They have families to provide for and whatnot, but if everyone had this mentality, it wouldn't be an issue. Like, if no one complied with the mess, or no one complied with inordinate, godless taxes, there's nothing they could do about it if enough people did the right thing. But there's always only a margin willing to stand, which makes pushing forward godly legislation more difficult. And yeah, so And then, because a lot of people are pastors and whatnot are cowards, God raises up people like Elon Musk who can actually have some influence and get some things done that aid the kingdom. Um, so, so last August we did a camp, and there was a few people that gave significant sums. We had, what was our financial goal? I'm trying to remember. I think our minimum financial goal for this camp was like $2,000, and we ended up raising like $2,400. And I stopped asking because we were originally going to do a 6-day camp, which became a 3-day camp. And the reason for that was the location that we use for the camp is from another ministry, and their priority is to bring people from the red zone to do camps all summer. And then on the last week, we get a week slot. But the people that live there who are going to help us and who we're going to do the camp for, they're exhausted by the end. And they need like a couple days rest between camps. So we decided to make it a 3-day camp, and we just crammed more English lessons into that. And I did this year like a Paddington. I took the Paddington movie, went through and took clips of it in English. We played a short clip in English and the same clip in Ukrainian, of which President Zelensky voiced the Paddington Bear, and then we basically worked through that dialogue or the screenplay text, the different phrases we use for vocabulary words, and yeah, so we did this whole camp. We had a lot of games, we had a lot of prizes. My goal when we do these camps is to just help the Ukrainian kids have a lot of fun and to give them a positive, memorable experience, to bless them, and then through this to share Christ and to point them to Christ as in conversation we have opportunity. So God once again provided the people that we need to help. We're a small nonprofit organization, so whenever we've done these events, we don't always know how we'll get the help we need. We just try to work with whoever God has provided around, and every single time we've got enough people to help. So these camps are a ton of work for me personally. Usually I would have Lyra to help me in the preparation. Then we'd have some friends who might take on 1 or 2 tasks to help us in preparation, and then other people to help with the food and the cooking. When we did the mountain camps, I would find like 4 guys and I would pay them to keep the fire going, to help the cook, to fill the water filters, to dump and clean the toilets, and just and then help us like set up the whole camp and tear down the whole camp. So yeah, this year also because when we were living in Western Ukraine, I had been preaching once a month at 2 churches there, a series through the 10 Commandments, and I was able to finally preach the 10th commandment. So it was a series of 11 sermons over about a year's time. Are our strivings for the sake of Christ or for the sake of our own kingdom?
Чи наші пожадання заради Христа, чи заради власного царства, панування?
Christ said, "My kingdom is not of this world."
Ісус сказав, що моє царство не від цього світу.
His kingdom is higher.
Його царство вище за це.
It's of a different sort.
Воно іншого гатунку.
The conquest of his kingdom does not happen through violence.
І здобування його царства приходить не через насилля.
Through violence, coercion, lies, or swindling.
Не через брехню чи якісь маніпуляції.
Which is typically how kingdoms expand, kingdoms of earth expand.
Бо через оце все зазвичай земне царство приходить, так, соціалістичне.
His kingdom comes by reorienting our loves by the power of the gospel.
Царство Ісуса приходить через переорієнтацію наших побажань через силу Євангелія.
Where the first one was an intro to the 10 Commandments. So I was able to finish that when we went out to do this camp. So that was a blessing. And then straight from there, Lyra and I went to Rome. And since we can't fly directly from Ukraine, we had to take a train to Budapest, and or is it Budapest or Bucharest? Budapest is Hungary. Or, oh my gosh. Budapest or Bucharest. My brain is glitching. It was in Hungary. So we went there on the train, then flew to Rome. We're in Rome for 4 days, I think. 4 full days. Or 3. But it was amazing. We still did a tour of the...
Also with pretty design, pretty lot of technical things, but in things like exotic plants or rocks emerge from the area underground. You will see like these rocks are lined up. The position by the geologists actually show where the track, some tracks used to be. These tracks on which they push is like sliding ramps, right? They push them on the tracks and then the track actually go up the wall. See the line, the diagonal line here? So go this way, right? Go up, and as it reaches the top, it actually got flat, okay? Bringing up trees, rocks, whatever was needed. So maybe set up a little forest, on one side, with the animals coming out from the trap door from behind the trees. Maybe the hunters, on the other side couldn't see them. People on the stands could see the entire thing. Those are called, let's say, special effects. Like in a modern theater, whole new stage scenery could be emerging from the area underground in 2 or 3 minutes that is actually described by some ancient writers. This town here instead, which runs along the short axis, right? Well, on the south side is the base of the Palatine, where the emperors used to live. It's not as of today, there's not recognition between the tunnel and the emperor's palaces. We're still assuming in case of need, maybe in case of riots, the emperors were able to run to the tunnel and reach their palaces safely without having to step outside. That actually been quite useful in a place like ancient Rome. It's never very politically stable, very unstable mob, frequent riots, let alone civil wars. Well, consider that emperors were elected for life, yeah? But as average time in office is about 4 years. So statistically, becoming the emperor was not good for you. Over 60% of them died of violent death. Over 60%, about 2/3. Okay?
Colosseum, we saw the Sistine Chapel and Vatican City, St. Peter's Basilica. We went to one of St. Calixtus Christian catacombs and did a tour there. And we ate dinner at a couple nice trattorias and tried a lot of the Italian food and pastries. And it was one of the best times we ever had in our life. Right up there with when we visited the Grand Canyon. So it was absolutely amazing. I want to go back. Maybe not in August or September. It was the first week of September. And maybe we'll wait if we ever go back till the fall when it's a little bit colder, because it's really hot there. But yeah, so that was awesome and refreshing for us, and we really loved it. And now we've been doing some Christmas celebrations where we went to a lunch and a dinner with people from Lyra's work, and they're not big on posting pictures for security reasons, so unfortunately we don't have any pictures from that, but it was a nice time of fellowship and food and hanging out with people from there. And then at one of the churches I'd been preaching at recently, Lyra had begun helping them with worship, and they prepared a couple months for a little Christmas sing-along. And so we were at that, and this is Secret Santa gift I got. So I got a Lego snowman, and I don't know how I'm going to put it together, but by God's grace, we'll get this figured out. So, yeah, that was really nice, and I got an idea to maybe next year, because a couple years earlier, I don't know if you remember, but we did a Christmas concert in Odessa where a friend of ours came from a nearby city, and his band played and Leo's band played, and that was a really nice event. And so I'm thinking about coming late summer to, as myself as the manager, to try to get 3 or 4 bands lined up to do Christmas songs, and to find a big church with nice acoustics to do a Christmas concert, and then maybe even do one in the center somewhere outside. So I'm begun thinking about this as an outreach where we can share the gospel next Christmas season. Lord willing, depending on what happens with the war and stuff. I actually have a bet with a friend from Odessa that if Trump were to become president, if the war was over by summer, I win, and he has to come wherever I live and either buy me lunch or cook me lunch. And if the war's not over by this summer, I have to do the same for him. So I didn't think, Trump would say, if I'm elected, I'll end this war in like 48 hours. I didn't think that was possible, but I do think it might be possible, or he could just provoke Putin to go even more nuts. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So we moved to Kyiv because we were in Ivano-Frankivsk for a year and a half. And wow, how do I put this? So, well, like I said, I try to be a glass house, but I don't want to get overly gossipy, but I will share. There are some things I should share, because I think I've done everything I can to confront this in private, multiple ways and multiple times. And so, well, before, when we were in Odessa, I had a situation at the church there where basically there was a conflict, and the person who approached the pastor about it had a problem with something I said. And then, but instead of going through the Matthew 18 where they come and speak to me first, and then if I'm apologetic and I repent, then it doesn't need to go further, because I guarantee you I would have. But they went straight to the pastor, and then the pastor had to organize a meeting, and I explained to the pastor, biblically, you're not supposed to do it that way, and he would just argue with me about it. And so this was never resolved in the right way. Then this escalated to a conflict with that pastor. It was never official, but I got angry, and then he said I needed to go to counseling for anger, because that was actually one of the reasons why I never wanted to become a pastor, because I struggled with anger. Sometimes I would organize these big events, and I would have to oversee multiple things to make sure everything's running smoothly. People would be lazy or just unthoughtful or forgetful, and sometimes I would become frustrated. And I thought, this is not a good model as a Christian leader, and it actually greatly grieved me. But when I said, okay, I will no longer pursue being a pastor, I'll just do everything I can to serve the church through para-church ministry, because I couldn't bear the thought of God not using me to build his kingdom somehow. I'm like, I will find a way. Despite my weaknesses, I'll be creative and do whatever I can. And the pastor said I was unwilling to counsel me himself, which was another frustration for me. I said, you're my pastor. I've been serving your church for 8 years. Why can't you counsel me? And he said, I don't know how to help you. And I'm like, well, you're not even trying. Sit down and read through the scripture with me. Pray with me. He had biblical counseling training, but my wife went through this same training, and I have myself learned a lot in biblical counseling, and I know that the method you're supposed to do was never done. I was never sat down and spent any time to learn about my past or what my anything about my thought process behind what I'm struggling with. So, I mean, we met for like accountability several times, like once a month or every other month we would meet and talk, and he was so non-confrontational that I would just tell myself what I need accountability for. And yeah, so I left that. When I left there, I told the church we're going to that I want a church that knows how to handle conflict resolution because of what happened at my last church. I think this is a good sign of maturity in the leadership to handle this stuff according to Scripture, and someone who's enthusiastic about our ministry, because we've been doing outreach ministry in Ukraine for 12 years, 13 years, and it would be nice to find the church that's enthusiastic about it. Now, of course, not everyone there like has to be involved in it or will want to be involved in it, but we would like it if you like promote it and just have a positive attitude about it, because our whole point is to come alongside as a parachurch ministry to plug people into your church and build your church. So if you'll be supportive of us, we'll be glad to. And so in the beginning, they were very supportive. We did a summer camp in the suggestion where they suggested, where they did their summer camps. And a little while later, the pastor asked me to preach once a month in the church. And then we started doing English camp in a village an hour away from there also, or an English club, and began preaching at the sister church there. And because during all the COVID stuff, me being a Reformed Presbyterian, I was frustrated with the churches that were not engaging in the culture war, were not standing against these vaccine mandates and mask mandates. And then I had time to delve more into some theology that I had a question mark about, because for many years I was just focusing on practical outreach ministry, building relationships. It was more evangelistically focused. And of course, with friends, there was an element of discipleship. But when I decided, okay, I'm not going to be a pastor, I will pursue just practical outreach ministry. But during the COVID lockdowns, I had a lot of time to research things. I went into researching postmillennialism, general equity theonomy, Paedo communion. Well, that came later that I researched this also. But anyways, my views became more aligned with Doug Wilson's, let's say. And then later I discovered guys like James Jordan, Peter Lightheart, Rich Lusk, who I really like. And I'd always known John Barrich for many years. So I looked intentionally for a CRAC church in Ukraine. We moved to Frankivsk because I had bought with a friend a piece of land nearby in the Carpathian Mountains. This friend had ended up screwing me financially. Long story there, but we got our money back by the grace of God. But anyways, that's why I moved there. It was for this church and because we had land nearby. And long story short, well, I came to see issues there. One was that they had another children's ministry at that church, and because some of the kids loved our camp so much, some of the leaders of that ministry didn't want to be involved in our ministry and even backbid us. And in my opinion, poisoned some of the kids against us. So it's like, not only are you not enthusiastic, you're actually backbiting our ministry and doing what you can to dampen enthusiasm for it. So this was frustrating, and we tried to have an intermediate meeting with the PM of this denomination in this area of the world. He did basically nothing. He's just laid back, kind of like, oh, whatever, and did nothing to help. And then when later he said, I'll be back here in a month and we'll maybe talk about it more. I'm waiting for a few days, and he never even asks about it. It was a conflict between my wife and another leader of that ministry, and no one asks about it. No one tries to help with it. I'm trying to bring constructive conversation and unity and harmony so we can work together in the same church to build the same church. And the communication was so poor. I can't go into the details without calling people out, but it was just hard to know how to plan anything. It's like, yes, you can do ministry here, of course, but how? Because we can't talk things like plan things like adults and count on anything that's planned. Part of this was Western Ukrainian culture can be late or change plans last minute and not even tell you. And this was not only in our church, this was just, we experienced on a number of levels from different people in that part of Ukraine. So yeah, this was hard for me because I'm a very, organized person, but I just came to accept that's how it was. So anyway, there was another issue, and we met to discuss this. I, in love, tried to put on the table what these issues were. And instead of confessing them and saying, we acknowledge this is true, we want to work and grow on this, because if they had said that, I would have praised God for the humility and the honesty, and I would have stayed and did everything I can to work with them. Instead, it was, we need you to issue a public apology that you even said this. And to me, this was, in God's eyes, repulsive, to ask me to issue a public apology for saying something that is true. And now, after leaving, we've been vindicated, because your sin will find you out, your sin will catch up to you. And with what I've been told is happening there, we've been vindicated. And until they repent and seek sincere change and help for these issues they're facing there, we will continue to be vindicated. So, Lyd and I, this was all very hard and heartbreaking for us. We invested a lot to move there. It was a huge, huge risk. And then joining a CREC church, leaving the Presbyterian church, you kind of put a target on your back because some of them think they're heretics. And I don't understand why, because if you ask people, why is CREC heretics, they'll say, oh, they're too Catholic. And they have a strawman view of their doctrine that thinks their salvation is work-based. So the controversial issues would be monocovenantalism, objectivity of the covenant, paedo-communion, general equity, theonomy, and maybe patriarchalism and Christian nationalism. So, and there's a podcast, if you want to know what my views are, it's Reformation Red Pill. I essentially have a very similar journey to the main host of that podcast, where he's still kind of tentatively exploring a lot of these subjects and figuring out what his views are about them. And so I knew that joining this church, I'm taking a big risk. And then when we had to deal with that whole mess, there was 2 other sister churches we could have went to and become members. We're actually ready to become members of this church, but even though we had serious concerns, I asked the pastor, look, if we do become members here, is this all just going to fall apart? When I asked this with my wife as a translator, he actually kind of turned red, and he seemed, I don't know, this question seemed to hit him hard. And then when we, a week or 2 later, came to actually do the process of becoming members, he didn't show up. And I was told it's because he was sick, because he was drinking too much. But I don't know why. But I think it was the grace of God that saved us from becoming members there. If I had become members there, we could have more say, because the way they think in that denomination is, if you're not a member, we're not even going to listen to you. When you can present situations like this as a non-member, you need a witness, and a lot of the friends that are still my friends are also their friends, and they really, I don't think they want to step into it in a serious way. So anyways, Lyd was working remotely for this humanitarian organization, and they told her, come a time where if you want to continue working for us, we need you to come to the office in Kyiv. So I said, okay, let's go on an adventure. Let's go to Kyiv and see how it goes. This is very hard on Lyd. I've moved around all my life. I'm a little more flexible, but nevertheless, I had to, because she had to come here and start working, I had to stay home in Frankivsk, and with the help of a friend or two, pack everything in our garage in our flat and put some in storage and move some to Kyiv. At the same time, I was studying Ukrainian because my U.S. driver's license expired. In order to renew my Oregon driver's license, I needed to have show proof of rental in Oregon. And I have a P.O. box, but I don't have a proof of rental. so I couldn't easily renew my license without actually going to Oregon. So I need to get my Ukrainian driver's license, which means learning Ukrainian well enough to pass it, because the only driving test I have is in Ukraine. So I was working on that, trying to pack everything myself, which was a ton of work. Got here, and from the whole experience there and out there trying to write them and approach them and other church leaders connected to them to find ways of reconciliation, I was very basically heartbroken, traumatized, and pretty depressed. And then we came to Kyiv, and the culture here is very different, and people here are more, at least at the church we went to, not very friendly. They're very not hospitable, a lot of them are just shy. And coming from CREC Church back into the Reformed Presbyterian Church, I don't know how people are going to receive me, and I'm just, in a difficult place. So, I just said, okay, for now, I need to just fight this depression. I need to get out of this. And so I asked, I was in a major funk place, and I thought, well, for the first time in our marriage, I'm home alone every day without my wife, and in this new city where I don't know anyone and people aren't really reaching out to build relationships. Every time I was in another place in Ukraine, people invite you to dinner, they invite you to barbecue, they invite you to hang out. They're really trying to befriend you and get you plugged into their church. And here, no one was doing that. And if we hung out with anyone, I was doing it. Or some people from leaders' work would have, go out to the movies or something, and I would be invited along. So yeah, it was difficult because I had no social life, and I come out of this heartbreaking experience because, believe it or not, I really loved and cared about those people, and it was just a real mess at the lack of humility and truthfulness in this whole situation and dealing with it in a constructive way. So, this ties me, my pastor in Odessa, who told me I need to go to counseling for anger. I had done this. I think it was like 7 months actually that I went through counseling with the guy who's the head of the Nouthetic Counseling Ministry in Ukraine. It was very difficult for me to find someone, but as my wife had just graduated from their school, he took me on, and I was going to counseling with actually him, the number 2 of their ministry, a woman, a Russian pastor from Moscow, and my wife. So I had 4 people going through these counseling sessions with me once a week for, 6 or 7 months. And they have a spreadsheet where you're trying to analyze, what your loves are, why things make you react the way they do, and you're doing a lot of navel gazing, trying to figure out what your motives are and why you get angry in certain situations. And I was sincerely trying so hard to figure this out, and I started reading a book by David Powlison called Good and Angry, and he had a statement in the book that for me was like, okay, this resonates, and it was like explaining that anger is complex and that you can have a good and a bad reason to be angry at the same time, or a good reason to be angry but act sinfully on it. And so he brought nuance to it and a paradox to it, and I thought this makes sense because I couldn't figure out my anger. And I sent the biblical counselor this statement, and while in the past he had me for homework read David Powlison articles, so he highly respects the man, but he disagreed with this. He said, no, it can't be, because they have a system in their biblical counseling where the Bible says no man can serve 2 masters, and so at any given time you can only have one ruling idol, and it must be an idol that's making you be angry. And I disagreed, so I stopped going to counseling there. And eventually, now jumping forward to in Kyiv, I decided, okay, because I was very frustrated with myself. I'm in my 30s and 40s, and every time I get angry, I'm distraught, and I'm like, I'm never going to change. I can't change. It's impossible. No matter how hard I try, I'm just stuck this way. So anyways, I said, okay, I'm going to slow down and figure this out. If anything, if I can change in this area, it's worth all this. And so I started every morning slowly reading through this book, Good and Angry, going through the discussion questions, thinking through them at the end of every chapter, praying through it, and sincerely meditating on it to internalize what I'm learning. And what he says agrees with everything I was trying to tell people, other pastors, about conflict resolution, about peacemaking, because I was reading the book Peacemaker, and he has a second book, the author of Peacemaker has a second book on peacemaking. And Pallison's essentially agreeing with everything this guy is saying about, basically, he calls it the constructive displeasure of mercy, where you don't just ignore the sin when somebody sins against you. Of course, you have to determine, there's a lot of sins, I believe, when we come together in a church. If you're just going to church on Sunday and going home and you never spend time with people in your church, you never plan ministry or do ministry together, you can avoid a lot of conflicts. But the more you get plugged in, the more time you spend with your church family, sinners and sinners, you're just waiting for some conflict to happen at some point, or somebody to do something weird. We all have, sinful stuff about our personalities. We're all just conflicts waiting to happen the more time we spend with one another. And we need to overlook a lot of stuff and just cover it with grace. But there are certain issues that should be brought up, that should be discussed, especially serious sin issues in leadership. And so you need to determine, you need to choose your fights, right? So, and when you do it, you need to pray and try to do it constructively. And when I have a serious issue like this, I usually spend some time fasting and praying and try to come in as humble of a spirit as I can, which is usually abnormally humble because I'm not always that humble, but I try to humble myself and come with a spirit of humility, contrition, and sincerity, seeking in love what's best for all parties involved. But it takes two. It takes two good faith actors both coming with this approach. So I started reading through this book, and then every day I was like, okay, what can I do to break out of this depression? I was like, if I drink more water and I walk more and I get out in the sun. So I started wearing a pedometer, counting my steps and walking my dogs and just exploring the city of Kyiv, which is a beautiful, clean city with lots of beautiful architecture. There's some places in Ukraine where the architecture is pretty depressing to look at every day. But here it's nice, and the parks are clean, and there's lots of different parks in every direction I can explore with the dogs. So my dogs became happier. I became happier. I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts every day to learn more about theology or learn more about writing, which is something I really like to study, or also crypto. So anyways, in time, I broke free from all that funk, and I actually became happy and happy to be alive again. And it was no longer, okay, if Russia bombs us, oh well, we'll go home, be with the Lord. It was more like, please wait, because I have things I want to do now, and you are looking forward to living life again. And I'm in a much better spot now. But yeah, so we went to, and I finished the book Good and Angry, and I actually saw change, literal, real, lasting change. And of course, nothing's perfect, and there's still room for growth, but yeah, praise God. And then I started thinking, wow, when I saw issues that other pastors had, I'm like, I could have been a pastor a long time ago. What am I waiting for? And then I started thinking, maybe I am supposed to be a pastor. And the pastor of the church here started inviting me to preach. I was preaching there like once a month. A couple weeks ago, we became members at this church. And then the other sister church, they lost a lot of people because they've lost two pastors for different reasons. And then all the elders they had either joined the army or left the country in the war. So I was helping them for a while, but then I said, look, the pastor of this church, so they used to have an international church, which was an English church. And while I'm studying Ukrainian, it's going to take a couple years before I'm even conversational. And then more years after that before I can actually preach well in Ukrainian. So it'd be way easier for me to plant a church if I could just do it in English. And there's more English speakers in Kyiv than anywhere else I've been in Ukraine. So I started seeing potential for this. But then there's the conflict of my theology becoming more CREC, but now being back in the Reformed Presbyterian Church and knowing there's a huge, that's going to be an issue. And the pastor says, like, you can preach here, but you couldn't be an elder. But then he says, there was an international church here that did really well with like very little advertising because of the number of expats here. And the pastor says that he could see me filling this niche because the other missionary left and he's retired now and isn't coming back. Actually told me he'd rather I filled this niche than anyone else. He thinks when the war ends, a lot of Americans will come back. But I don't understand how it will happen because of my doctrinal views. I mean, it took me years to develop these views. I don't just change my mind on these things overnight. So if they want me to change my mind, they need to have discussion with me. They need to challenge me to read stuff or listen to stuff. I send them stuff to check out. They don't send me nothing to check out. Finally, I got in a discussion with one guy because I told him, I said, look, if I'm going to keep preaching here, we need to make a decision. Is this a long-term thing or not? And his issue, he's not an elder, he's just the guy leading the thing because they have no elders right now. He's just trying to keep their church alive. Started basically discussing paedo communion with me. And so we've been discussing that, and that's on pause now because of my arm. We will get back to this discussion, but it's just, all this is a huge step of faith because I'm really alone here. I even wrote the head prime minister of all the synods I said, look, I don't want to ask you to intervene in this situation or to mediate, but okay, my wife's calling. I will call her back. I don't want to ask you to mediate because I feel like if I do bring him into this situation in that way, it can just create a war, which is not my intention at all. I want to create true, authentic, biblical reconciliation and harmony. Then we could maybe start a correct church in Kyiv. I'm not saying I need to head it, but I would love to be involved in it. But this is the closest thing to my theology we have here, so we became members there. But I can't become an elder, but he says he would like me to pastor this church, but it's going to start out as a Bible study. So after the new year, I'm starting a Bible study in English, and then we're going to see what comes of it. And so that's where we're at now with ministry. And I asked him if I can preach less often at his church because I want to, put time into preparing my messages here. And so that's where we're at now with ministry. Lera was helping that church also with music. And I said, wait, before we go too far with this, because we don't want to develop relationships with you guys too deeply if this isn't going to become a long-term thing. And it doesn't seem like we're taking the necessary steps for that to even be possible. But you just want me to preach so you can later find somebody else. And I was like, not okay with that. Because it's like, I'm going to give you guys a lot of my time and service. And because I have a couple views, it's like, and then the presbytery doesn't even view them as a legitimate church because they don't have any elders. So it's like they're trying to adhere to the presbytery and at the same time rebel. So and I said, look, we can, if I can talk with the presbytery, if they're okay with my views, then we can take steps there. But we're not going to continue to give you more of our heart and time if we're not taking those steps. And I gave them different options, and then it was like, oh, since you understand our situation, maybe you'll continue helping us. It's like, wait a second. No. Yes, I understand your situation, but I gave you other options, and you don't want to take any of them. So anyways, I stopped preaching there. So I am in no man's land as far as all this. I actually, when I was in the state of depression, I was thinking to call a friend of mine who's a former missionary in Ukraine, who's a Lutheran pastor, and he's head of over the Free Lutheran Church in Ukraine, and he told me, why don't you just plant a Lutheran church? And I said, I'm not Lutheran. Lutherans aren't, post-millennial. They have a different view of the Eucharist. And his response was that in like the theology behind everything that we do, you're basically free to do the liturgy any way you want. But in form and practice, it's all pretty much the same. Because I would do covenant renewal worship, but, and I would probably instill my own version of that. But anyway, it just doesn't make sense for me. And I love him and I have nothing against him, but I called him for support and encouragement, and then it became, why don't you plant a Lutheran church? Which I guess that's the way to try to encourage me, but it just doesn't make sense according to my convictions. So, anyway, yeah, so the future is uncertain, and my dream has become to be a writer. I tend to do 8 different things in life, like above average, but I never really like mastered one thing, whether it be writing, whether it be crypto trading, whether it be graphic design or cooking. I've considered starting a restaurant before. All the things that I love in life, woodworking, what have you. I never, like preaching, I never went 100% on one thing to become a master of it, and that's not necessarily wrong. I heard Jordan Peterson talking about this once, where he says that some people prefer this life this way, to have, a number of things that they just do well, but they're not necessarily experts in it. And for some people, that's a nice life. And that makes sense to me. But I don't know. I think I have a raw potential for writing well. And someday I have like 5 fiction. Well, one is a novel series. One is a Christmas novella. One is a TV series, and one's a movie I'm working on. And they're all actually they're all connected in the same sci-fi world, but from different angles. And then I have a fiction book I'm working on, which would be basically 365 days of advice about how to live and think about the world for my children. And if I wrote this, even though I don't have children, I thought this would be a way for people to really get to know me and what my views are and how I would teach children if I had them. We haven't been able to have children yet, and we would never have been able to do all the ministry that we did if we had. So we're not like despondent about that or anything, but we're thinking maybe would be nice if soon we had children, because we're going to be grandpa and grandma parents, which is actually the coolest kind of parents you can have. But basically we decided, depending on how our investments do next year, if they do well, we want to adopt a few kids from ages young to 10, I think. And that's our plan, unless the Lord should give us our own kiddos. So, and if our investments don't do well, maybe we'll do a fundraiser. Maybe I'll visit the States and fundraise, because adopting kids is very expensive in Ukraine. The orphanage industry here is very corrupt, and they try to milk everything they can out of Westerners when they, trying to go through this process. Hopefully the laws will get better. I know that Zelensky's wife is big on helping children, so I really hope they can weed out some of the corruption in the adoption agency. But so that's our plan with that. And I think I pretty much covered everything, except for views about Ukraine and Russia. I was going to talk about that a bit, but basically because I defend American conservatism to my Ukrainian friends, and I warn them against people like BlackRock and Soros, or explain how America was involved in Euromaidan. The Ukrainians don't like that, and because I tell my American conservative friends that they are getting a lot of things wrong about Ukraine, they don't like that. So like I said, people can believe or agree with 9 out of 10 things you say, but if you say one thing they don't like, they're done with you. And it's, in my view, ridiculous. Like, a lot of Christians think that avoiding conflict or any kind of disagreement or any kind of argument, even if it's done in the right spirit, is unchristian. This, in my opinion, is not biblical, and it's not even mature. Mature Christianity is being willing to engage in conflict or disagreement, and to do it well without it heating your emotions. That is Christian maturity. Learning how to communicate and knowing what topics need to be confronted, and to be willing to do it even if it costs you, because the other people, rather than think through an intelligent, biblical, calm rebuttal, will just avoid it and be done with you. So What is Christian about that? Even like, that was another frustration when I left the correct church. Like Peter Lightheart teaches in his Matthew commentary on Matthew 5, and I think it's Matthew 5, on bringing your gift to the altar. So what they do in their liturgical service is there's a part where they come and shake hands with everyone in the congregation and say, peace to you. Mir vam in Ukrainian. And so I asked them, does this mean you're just hoping for God's peace upon them? Or you're saying peace to you because we have peace, and if we don't have peace before Sunday, because you take communion every Sunday, we've done everything in our power to make peace with that person. And therefore we can authentically and truly say peace to you. And this reminds me, I didn't finish the story with the PM that I wrote. And I told him, I don't want you to mediate in this situation, but if you can help me figure out what I should do here, would be nice. He told me it's going to be a while. Like, he didn't even respond to me. Then I said, did you get my email? Like a couple months later, he said, yes, but it's going to be a while before I respond, basically, because you're not a member, blah, blah. It's like, nobody cares to ask anything. Like, I was in the process of becoming a member, and the pastor actually did not even show up. And it's like saying, like, oh, if you're a member, your concerns are worth my time. If you're not, you're not worth my time. And it's like, I don't think that's going to fly with Jesus. Especially if you're coming and you're saying like how seriously you want to be involved in their church. It's strange. Like, there's nothing Christian about it. So if you're too busy for people, and I see how much you engage with people on Twitter and other venues, but you don't have time for this person who made a huge sacrifice to be a part of your church and took a big risk by adopting these doctrinal views, and you're not going to even communicate with them, it's really ungodly, in my opinion. So I'm just stuck here. And I have a lot of sincere questions about forgiveness and reconciliation, because a lot of these books on the topic, actually, there's a lot of nuanced questions they don't address, and I would like to find somebody learned and wise to ask about it. That's one of the posts I was talking about that I was planning to write about, and I'm going to write about very soon. What was I talking about? I forgot. I think I covered all my subjects, but I kind of jumped around like a spider web instead of going through them systematically. But yeah, so that's about it. This video is over an hour now. I don't know if I mentioned that I'm also studying Ukrainian every night with a guy. So for now, for what we see in the future, that will be my focus, is learning Ukrainian, doing the English Bible study, not knowing where this all is going to lead, but that's okay. Just trying to be faithful here in Ukraine to serve the church. My wife does translation ministry and music ministry and biblical counseling for a couple girls on the side, and then working full-time as well. And yeah, please keep us in your prayers. Keep Ukraine in your prayers. Thank you for those of you that supported us, for those that gave for the camps, for those that give every month. If you would like to support our ministry financially, it's still, if you do it before the end of the year, it will be tax deductible. So we love you guys. If you would like to come to Ukraine, do an outreach ministry, just write me. We can figure things out. There's a lot of different things we can do. Like I said, we can do a Christmas concert. We can do English outreach. We can do camps in the mountains. So if you have a team from your church that would like to come and serve Ukraine in that way, we can help you organize that. So God bless you. We love you. Merry belated Christmas and happy holy days.